And I just, before Phoebe says hers, wholeheartedly disagree.
Did you write this, Phoebe?
I tried to roast you and forgot. ChatGPT wrote it.
Yeah, I can tell it's not saying anything.
This is a short story. It's a novella, so it's shorter than a novel, Isaac, for anyone who's wondering.
Okay, it's a novella.
Novella.
First of all,
Very
making a
meta.
great point.
Very meta.
this is really artistic for an author to be able to sort of build this ecosystem. And the only time where it fell apart was when
Let's go beyond the first page. Let's go beyond the first page.
Welcome back, Second Pagers. This is Beyond the First Page podcast with siblings Phoebe, Isaac, and Phil. I'm Phoebe.
And I'm
I'm
Isaac.
Phil.
And today we are talking about The Hunter by Tana French. This is Club Meeting 11. And I am very excited to discuss this book with you guys. Before we do, just a few housekeeping things. If you like this podcast, please follow us on Instagram and Spotify and YouTube. Please let us know what you think in the comments. And if you're looking for the full book list that we plan on reading this year, please check out our Instagram, or you can leave us a comment on Spotify and we will happily provide you with all of those books that we will be reading. We will also be talking about major spoilers and plot points of this book, The Hunter, and also major plot points of The Searcher, which was the first book in this series. So I just want to put that out there for all of our listeners. If you want to read this book and you don't want things to be spoiled for you, we recommend reading the book first and then come on and listen to the podcast and let us know what you thought about the book. And I think today I want to start with talking about maybe an underrated series that we have recently read that's fantasy. For all of our listeners out there that love fantasy, we really wanted to give you some recommendations about a good fantasy series that maybe you haven't heard of. So Phil, why don't you start us off and let us know? You're the king of underrated fantasy series. So
It's high on it. I'm going to hit you with two, both by the same author. And I would be surprised if most people have heard of these. Sebastian de Castell. The first series is The Greatcoats, and it's about three sort of musketeerish friends that commit themselves to honor and stuff, and they were good with the last king, and then this new tyrannical king came up, and they're sort of frontier justice. The other one is by him is the Spellslinger series, which follows sort of this cast out son. He's just, the author's really, really funny, good, great plot elements. They're so dissimilar in plot and worlds, but they're really easy to follow, not childish at all. Would highly recommend both of them. Don't know how they're not famous. So
yeah, I'd never heard of those. We'll definitely read them though, if you recommend them. Isaac, what about you?
So I was going to mention one, but I'll mention it later in what I'm reading right now, and it's really good, but it's a little something for you guys to listen to the whole show for. I'm going to recommend the Red Rising series. It's probably not underrated. I think it's pretty popular, but as far as fantasy books go, and someone who maybe is not as much into, which I'm not saying I'm not, but like into the magic and all these weird animals and stuff, this is a great fantasy / sci-fi series about the future and how the human race has evolved in living across the solar system in caste systems. And it is really excellent.
Oh, interesting.
and it's got a great narrator too.
I've actually I haven't done audiobook. I've only read them, but I have heard that.
Oh, the guy's very Irish.
Oh, love that.
Yeah.
Mine is The Black Witch Chronicles. It's by Laurie Forrest. And I think I would describe this as a PG version of Fourth Wing. It follows university students, but obviously they're magical. So they're going to a magical university, and it's a very good, underrated fantasy series, in my opinion. So check that out if that sounds interesting to you. We can get into The Hunter. And I think firstly, just saying why we picked it. I had heard of Tana French, obviously, before, hadn't read any of her stuff, and thought that this was a new release that was coming out in 2024. And her writing did not disappoint based on what I had heard. So I hope you guys thought so too. And Isaac, if you could just tell us a little bit about The Hunter before we start talking about it, that would be great.
Yep. So this is the book in 60 seconds, and this is The Hunter. Cal Hooper, who's an ex-Chicago PD detective, has lived in Art Nacklety, which is a small rural Irish town, for now a little bit over 2 years, and he's settled into life pretty well. He has a new girlfriend, Lena, and a 15-year-old girl, Trey, who he and Lena see almost as a daughter. Cal and Trey have bonded after he helps her discover what happened to her brother, and things are, as the Irish say, just grand. Can't say it in the accent, though. Then Trey's vagabond father shows back up in town and brings with him a rich English acquaintance and a plan to make money with a farce of finding gold. Johnny, Trey's dad, gets some locals involved in his scheme and Trey along with them, but Trey's having none of it. She wants to get back at her dad for abandoning the family and get back at the local men for what they did to her brother, and that was in the last book, The Searcher. Cal wants nothing to do with any of it, but cares enough for Trey to become involved to try to protect her. When Johnny's Englishman turns up dead, the whole town is in a tizzy about who did it, and Cal begins to wonder how much more Trey is involved.
Yeah, and I mean, just right off the bat, I did not at all expect it to be Sheila, which was Trey's mom. So I thought that was good, at least that was surprising to me. I don't know if that was surprising to either of you.
I think that is something that sort of differentiated why we had felt differently about this book. At that point, I didn't care who it was.
Oh, interesting.
I was like, it doesn't really matter. I'm just, I wasn't really.
Or caring.
Well, it wasn't. I just didn't think it actually mattered. It didn't matter that Sheila did it.
Yeah.
And I mean, that was sort of the point.
Right. I was going to say, to your point, and kind of what we all, our sentiment talking this over was this a murder mystery, or was this just a novel with a murder in it? And what did French want us as the reader to get out of this book? And what did you get out of it, you know?
Yeah, I personally, if I can go first and then want to hear what you guys have to say, I did not see this as a murder mystery or a thriller. I think that it was so different from thrillers where there's a big reveal and it builds towards something surprising. It was more sort of an exploration of characters, and I think Phoebe felt a little bit differently, but I wouldn't say that, like, oh, if you're a big crime person, you would love this one. I think if you're a fan of good, one thing, Tana French, poetical. Just a great writer. Nobody could ever take that away. Description, she could just win a creative writing course. I think that the Dublin Murder Squad, for me, those are murder mysteries. And this one, I think I said in my notes, I wouldn't even say a slow burn. Like, there's an ember that's still hot. That would be the pace of this book for me.
Yeah.
Yeah. I can understand why you would think that.
Yeah, I would give it a slow burn. I think it had a little more than just the ember. I could warm up on this book for sure. I also would probably say it trends more towards just a novel though than a murder mystery, because truly the murder of the Englishman kind of gets the pace to pick up, but it really wasn't that, not to say it wasn't that important, because it kind of like led everything to place, but it was just the last little thing that pushed it over the edge to let the rest of the books unfold. So it had more the pace of a novel for me, and I think it's a little slower than, the crime mysteries than that probably most people like, and I would put myself into that category as well, but I still liked it. I was engaged.
Yeah. Which I think, to your point, Isaac, as you said, this is more of a novel with, if I'm understanding you correctly, this was more of a novel with a murder in it because of that other additional plot line. And like what you're saying, Phil, where the characters are really the plot, and it's less about, and that for me is why The Searcher was fast paced, because you're getting introduced to all these characters. It wasn't, okay, I don't want to say it was fast paced, but it was interesting to me because you're getting intimately introduced to all of these characters. And that was interesting because the way that French writes all of her characters. So I think, to me, I would agree with Isaac. It's more of it was a slow burn. But again, I think, especially having read The Searcher, I don't know that I was even looking for a burn at this point. I was invested in the characters. I wanted to see how Trey was doing. I wanted to see if Cal and Lena got together. I wanted to see Cal's relationship with his daughter, how that was progressing, you know? So I think to me,
Yeah.
it didn't leave me wanting something because I was invested in the characters, which I do think French did a good job, obviously, of hooking you with that.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think that the characters were very well explained and well built out. I don't think there was a part where, I mean, the biggest thing, just contrast this entirely with a Jodi Picoult character that makes absolutely no sense. This was really, everything was cohesive in the characters. I don't think that made the characters interesting enough for me that contrast with something like Casual Vacancy, where the characters were very, very interesting to me. Maybe it was because they were so recognizable. I think part of why I didn't like this is because for me it was like reading a novel about Ligonier, and I put that in my notes. It was like you're stuck at the Googly and someone just maybe bought you a beer, but now you're like fucking stuck at the bar with this guy as he tells you everything that happened since you left Ligonier. And you're just like, oh my God, how can I get out of this situation?
No, but that's
and it's just
what
like,
you're describing is the Fury, Phil. That's exactly the situation that Isaac described with the Fury, and I didn't feel that at all.
Mark was that guy at the bar where I'm just like, I gotta get out of this conversation.
Oh.
Yeah,
Like-
but that's what she intends, don't you think?
I'm right, I know, and I just
Like you didn't get a pick up in the heart when they're making Johnny dig his own grave.
that. I mean, I like that part. No, I mean, I do think there was a little bit. The other thing that I think that made it a little harder for me to really get invested in the characters was the fact that there were so many of the guys that it was hard for me.
I think what you're saying kind of is there's this group of guys who could be interchangeable with any of the other group of guys, but I think that is important, and we can talk about Mark, but I think it's important, this group of guys and how they're indistinguishable because of the way that The Searcher ends. So basically, you know, obviously spoiler alert here, Trey's brother gets killed, and it's by this group of men who all are the Artnakelty local farmers, and they're not going to ever admit who did it, right? They were all there. They're all culpable at this point, and they're never going to say who dealt the blow, essentially. And I think that's important because that you can't distinguish them. And that Cal couldn't distinguish them in the first book. Trey can't distinguish them now, so she's trying to get all of them in trouble. So I think that's important to not have a super distinct character within that group besides Mart, who, in my opinion, is obviously the ringleader. I think obviously he's important, and I can't decide if I like him or don't like him. I know you were like, it's obvious, Phil, that you would not like him, but then why does Cal keep entertaining him?
Yeah, that was one of the questions I had, especially listening, and they kind of get into it, just like, but right in the beginning of the book, when he still entertains Mark coming up to his fence and, you know, shooting the shit, why is Cal putting up with this? And then he kind of reveals later he likes living there. He doesn't want to go back to America. You know, he has this new life here, and he's kind of stuck with it. And the subtle messages that Mark has laid out in the past book and in this one, he just sort of has to go with and kind of make nice with it. I don't know how realistic that is, but it kind of blows up the whole story if he just doesn't engage. So I guess you have to do it. But it makes me think about, like, how many people in my life are giving me all these subtle hints that I'm just missing completely. That, you know, there's this whole inner dialogue that Cal has every time him and Mart talk, like, oh, Cal knew exactly what Mart was saying, and I'm just putting myself in Cal's shoes and just thinking, I would not be picking any of this up. I would be
No.
I would be so clueless.
You'd be in the ditch.
Yeah, I think that to go off of your point, Isaac, and your point, Phoebe, too, I do think Mart is the ringleader. I do think that Art Nackleby, the
Art
town,
McKelty.
is Art McKelty is probably the main character in this book. I wouldn't say that Shannon or Lena or Maureen or any of them is more important. And it's also the impetus for the entire plot, sort of. Maybe it's just the group of guys that represent this town, but Trey is really fighting the town, and no one in the town gave the Reddys the time of day. So, like, yeah, the Brendan thing is making that come to a head, and that's where she sees the group of guys. But the entire town didn't give Johnny Reddy the time of day. And Lena is what she identifies with Trey because she hated the town. She didn't hate that group of guys. She hated the entire ecosystem. And I think that that's what Tana French is. I mean, in the end, the town is the killer. The town is the culprit. The town is what prevents anybody from actually finding justice. I think the town is the most important character in this entire book. And I do think that is her aim. What goes to Isaac's point, I think, is a good question of how realistic did she nail it? I think she nailed it.
Saying, did she nail it? Like, did she nail what?
Did she nail what? Is this a realistic thing? Because I think this is sort of like a fantasy magic building world. Like, I think she did it, except for one spot. The only time where it fell apart was when Maureen made Lena pay for the apple. That would not have happened. It wouldn't have. If Maureen owned the shop, she would have eaten her own apple, and Lena wouldn't have had to pay for the apple that Maureen ate. That wouldn't have happened. Everything else, I think she nails it.
Okay.
Phil, you're
Very
making a
meta.
great point.
Very meta.
Yeah, very meta. You're making a great point. I don't even know what conversation you're referring to about the apple situation, but I think
I do.
I mean,
He goes down there afterwards to find out more about who the town is saying killed the English guy, Patty Englishman.
And she picks up an apple. She pays for her own. But then Maureen asks for an apple from her own shop, and like Lena pays for that. That's a weird.
Think we're talking about something that doesn't really matter at all. I don't think, but I didn't think Maureen made her pay. She just did it.
Yeah, it's a very interesting point. I did not think about that. I agree with you that the town is the main character, and I do agree that French nails it when it comes to creating that ecosystem. And I think not only through her consistency, barring the apple incident, but also the writing, you feel like you're in this small Irish town, and she's able to, elicit that feeling from you. So I completely agree with you. I think she also does a realistic job of creating a situation where people think that they can take the law into their own hands.
Yeah. I've never thought of a town as a main character, but I like the thought of it. It seems like you definitely thought it through, so I'll buy it.
Did you think, though, Isaac, that they believe, like, it was believable that nobody would get caught, or like, no one would be prosecuted for the death of two people, but now that have died?
So I think that Phil's analogy of a fantasy world, even though it's not fantasy, was really good. And I don't have a problem with believable or non-believable in nonfiction, fiction, because it's fiction. So even if it's not realistic, It made for a good story. So the fact that the whole town wasn't going to say anything about the gold, that detective went through the whole book never knowing there was a scheme about ripping people off for fake gold. And the fact that everyone knew, don't bring it up, and it just kind of went away and was never part of it, is in true reality, no, I don't think that's realistic at all. But I think it's a great way to say it. This world that she's created, yes, it was very realistic. And I think she hit the nail on the head about how people who don't know a very small rural town see a small rural town. you know? So as far as talking about things realistic or not, something I really liked is that when Trey, I thought of Trey as the main character, when Trey went to film the guys in the river doing the fake gold and she sees Cal, in a lot of stories that would be, you know, the turning point where she turns on Cal and doesn't trust him anymore. And she just goes, which I think is very realistic, both in this world and in real life, being, oh, I know him enough that something must be going on here. And that was it about it. I hate, not hate, so many stories have that very obvious, like, oh, he's betrayed me. But that didn't really happen. She still had her own thing, but it just, this relationship, which was non-traditional to begin with, just continues on. And they have their little feuds and whatnot, but that wasn't the turning point. I like that a lot.
Yeah, I mean, if I saw either of you doing something fraudulent, I would be like, they're trying to catch somebody in something.
I think it's interesting too. You didn't really know where Trey stood all the time. It wasn't clear. You couldn't tell if she was on Cal's side. You couldn't tell if she was on her own side. You couldn't tell if she was on her dad's side, because she was playing all these different roles. She's a kid, obviously, you know, it's hard, but
I think that was both interesting and realistic, that I don't think Trey was on the same side the entire time.
as
Because
Cal,
she was
or
trying
as
to nail her dad. She was trying to nail her dad, and then she's like, I'm trying to nail the town. The situation was really evolving for her, and I think it would have been unrealistic for her to learn about this super big plot and then be like, yep, keeping my same enemies here, because it shifted drastically.
yeah. I think I'm thinking too, like, are you interested in seeing justice? I think that was like really the point you were also trying to get at, Phil, where yes, I think we all agree it's realistic that Tana French made this ecosystem where people are dealing out justice in their own way. But from a very traditional, especially American perspective, all three of us being from a small town, but that would just be unrealistic that would happen. Are you looking for justice for Trey and for Cal at this point too, because he's invested? Do you want someone to be, you know, apprehended for these two murders? And I'll answer that I would like to. And that's why for me, I liked this book, because I'm looking forward to the next one, and I'll probably reread these books to refresh myself and because I enjoyed them. So yeah, I'm wondering, are you looking for a third book that delivers some sort of justice, or do you think justice has been served?
I was looking for justice against Johnny Reddy the moment he was mentioned.
Okay, you're like Cal.
Yeah, I think he's just a despicable character. You know, that kind of person just has no right to be around. And I think I very much agree with Cal the whole time. Like, he just needs to leave. You know, it doesn't matter. He doesn't need to die. It's a little crazy, but and I talked about this before, but I loved the scene building up to all the guys making him dig his own grave. I thought that was awesome. And were they going to kill him or not? I had no idea, and it really had me. Holy crap! These guys are maybe just going to do it. You know?
Yeah. Especially knowing their history.
So the thing with, yes, they ended up killing Brendan Reddy, Trey's older brother, in the first one, but I don't necessarily think they played that right. I think they could have very easily said, we went up because we were worried about a kid in the community, found him in his, you know, little shack about to cook meth, and we tried to be like, hey, come on, leave, don't do that. And he tried to run away, fell, and hit his head on the radiator. And you just go to the police with him, and they're like, why that became such a big covering up and everything was kind of bizarre to me. And it can go back.
Because the ecosystem.
That's the entire don't want outside.
It goes back to the town of they just don't want their dirty laundry aired, all that. But that to me is the wrong play. If that happened to me, even if I went up there with the intention of, you know, doing some harm, I would just be like, okay, this very real excuse just fell into my lap. I'm going to take it. So for whatever reason, that just, like, seeing them get justice just didn't have as much of a draw to me because at the end of the day, it was an accident. Like it wasn't that's how I read it. Now maybe that's just, it was an accident from Mart's telling to Cal. So what actually happened, who knows? Maybe you're supposed to be suspicious of that, but
Right.
I don't think Cal necessarily, I don't think he ever voices his suspicion of it. And if he is, he obviously
Hides it
conveys
really
to
well.
Trey and conveys to the reader that, I'm believing that this was an accident. So, and I think maybe that's how he moves on from the whole Mart
Yeah.
thing as well, even though he doesn't agree with the cover up. But so, Cal seems like a guy that, he's got his code. They talk about that. So keeping that, I just don't look for the justice against those other guys for that murder. But yes, I wanted Johnny Reddy held to account
Justice for Johnny
right
Reddy.
away.
I think I bought it in the first book because it was for Trey. I don't back to back. I think if she does it a third time, it will be.
We don't know if he lets him get off with, like, the town didn't murder Patty Englishman. The Reddys did.
Yeah,
he
but
only got involved in this whole thing to keep an eye on stuff because he didn't trust Johnny Reddy and didn't trust what he was going to do with Trey. The town has nothing to do with this murder. They have something to do with the obstruction of the
law
of justice.
Yeah, but
that's what I sort of mean. He's definitely actively obstructing justice with the detective, and I'm not sure I buy that.
Yeah.
Even for the protection of Trey?
I think in the end it's for the protection of Trey. I don't think, I mean, maybe, and that's why reading it, I don't feel that way until I take a step back and be like, this guy gave his whole life to criminal justice, and now he's just like, and like, would he have dug that final divot of just being okay with killing Johnny Reddy? I think that's a super big question that she's leaving open for chapter 3.
So I don't know if this adds to your thinking, but in the Searcher, he does say why he left the Chicago Police Department, because his partner shot a black man that they were chasing.
Oh,
and he ended up being unarmed, and then the partner was like, you saw him reach for something, and Cal just felt the pressure to say, yes, I did. When he was like,
it was the one incident. You're right. He does say that, but he also says he was sick of politics and sick of the entire. But you're right. He does trace it back to the one incident, and I had forgotten about that.
So I think he recognizes that, even if it's in Ireland, you were talking about the broken justice system here. I think he does recognize it, so it could be a reason that he went to get away. So he's already leaving the line of the law already.
Yeah, I liked that. I do like your point, Phil. It is a little bit hard to buy, and I think, Isaac, to your point, I think she makes a case for why he may be ready to do that. This is not exactly in line with what we're talking about, but I wanted to read this quote because it's kind of the idea of downplaying murder, which in my opinion, both these books do. And the quote is, "A card cheat's a terrible thing," Mart explains. "I'd rather have dealings with a murderer than a card cheat any day. A man could become a killer by happenstance if his day didn't go to plan, but there's not such a thing as an accidental card cheat." And it's just, it's quote, funny. Yeah. I mean, that speaks to the Searcher to me more, but it also speaks to this conversation of, would Cal have been this is a big deal. Murder is a big deal, regardless of your code or what you're trying to get away from. And so, it is interesting to think about, would someone who spent their life upholding the law be okay with this? It's just interesting to think about.
Maybe Phoebe, I was searching also for justice a little bit more because this book again read to me about with the pace of a courtroom drama, but then there was no trial.
I feel like this brings the whole conversation back to town. I think the town did have a trial in their own bizarre little way, by not talking about the gold, by everyone by giving a message of, if something doesn't come out of this, we're going to pin it on Cal. Lena, doing a courtroom move by pretending to be engaged to him to kind of tie him in.
Yeah.
And then by them driving out with Johnny Reddy, and Cal's a part of that, to have him start digging his own grave, potentially his own grave. I think the town did have a trial and was going to cast a verdict one way or the other.
Yeah.
So
great point.
you could see it that way. If you want to play as the town is, you know, a jury of your peers, the courtroom, and potentially the executioner all in one.
True. I mean, so I think just hearing all of our thoughts and trying to understand that, I do really want to hear what your rating was of this book and talking about why we gave it the rating we did. So, Bill, could you just explain a little bit the Michelin scale that we use to rate the books in the book club?
Yeah, so the Michelin scale, 1 star is that we liked the book. It was nothing special, and also maybe not good enough to recommend. 2 is we would recommend to somebody, and 3 is we would read it again. So 2 stars, I think, is a pretty good book.
I would say a 2-star too is like a 4 or 5 almost on Goodreads, depending on what you're looking at. So that's just something to keep in mind if you're looking at our Goodreads.
I think that's a good. So in that vein, I gave this a 1 star. I got through it. I wouldn't recommend it. It was too slow for me to risk my reputation on a recommend. I think that I gave it a 3 on Goodreads, which sort of aligns to what Phoebe's saying. If I recommended Tana French, I think the Dublin Murder Squad would be my recommendation. It's similar writing, just more fast-paced.
What about you, Isaac? What'd you give it?
I gave it a 2. I think that while we talked about the slow burn maybe hurts a little bit as far as mysteries go, I think if you maybe listen to this podcast or listen to the beginning of when we talk about it and realize this is not a murder mystery and go in with that thought, you're really going to enjoy this book.
Yeah, good point. Yeah, and I think I did.
Don't listen too far, because then we immediately spoil the entire book.
If you've made it this far, you don't have to read it,
You
I
know.
guess.
No, I think for me, because I had the expectation it was a murder mystery, but I did read it is a slow burn and that there's more going on there. And so it was a 3 for me, actually. I mean, maybe I'm forcing the 3 a little bit. I really want us to read a 3, but I think I would reread it to refresh my memory for a 3rd book. If she writes a 3rd book, I would probably reread the series to prepare for that. I really enjoyed the writing. I felt like it transported me. It was a very charming story, and charming. As much as it's not a charming town, it was a charming town. You really felt like you were there.
I do think as part of just this is not a quote, I think that it was so well, as Phoebe said, like a charming town, that you felt you were actually there, that it was almost dissonant when they mentioned iPhones. That's how it was. Did you guys feel that way when they were mentioning current trends? I was
they mentioned
wait,
like
what?
the Jonas Brothers or something too. Like it was present day. Yeah.
Right.
I thought something too,
totally.
if we were just going in on the writing, all the Irish dialogue when they're they're talking, it's all and tall and everything's grand. Everything's like your man doing this, your man. So funny.
Yeah.
So
I love it.
My only quote that I want to share, actually, and I think this is one of the funniest parts because I just personally am feeling this a little bit. I'd say he got religion, Bobby says. The Yanks do always be getting religion. They're not allowed to do the business unless they're married. Where would he get any religion around here? Shane demands. Everyone's Catholic. You don't get that. It's not the fucking chicken pox. You're either born with it or you're not. Which I think is so funny about Irish Catholicism.
Yeah, that's hilarious. It reminds me of the Heart's Invisible Furies a little bit too.
Yeah.
Like with
Right.
the whole
Or in the first
funny.
one, like I'd read the first one, we had read the Heart's Invisible Furies pretty recently before that, and how Mart's going on like, oh, I voted for the gays to get their rights or whatever. This was, present, it was maybe 3 years ago, and it's like, yeah, I just wanted to see what would happen just to make the priests mad. He voted for it just to piss off the local priest.
So I actually think Mart is gay.
Yeah, I do too.
I never thought about it. I wasn't reading into it too much.
It's just interesting. He's always going on about Cal and Lena, and then he doesn't have anybody. He's never been married.
It'd probably be tough to be
Interesting.
married to Mart.
Yeah, true. So if you liked The Hunter by Tana French, what book would you like? Phil, would you give us a recommendation on a book you'd like if you liked The Hunter or The Searcher?
Yeah, I mean, I think Casual Vacancy is another one where it's all about the town dynamic. And I just, before Phoebe says hers, wholeheartedly disagree. But I do think that another one that's sort of, John Grisham sometimes writes where the town is like extremely important. So the Jake Brigance, he's a lawyer in a small town, Clayton, Mississippi. That series would be another good one.
That sounds like something Isaac would like.
Yeah, he would.
Isaac, what about you? Since I'll go last, since it's contentious.
Okay. I put the Walt Longmire series. I do think, and John Grisham in general, I think will, like Phil said, will kind of scratch your itch for this. The Walt Longmire series is they made a Netflix show out of it, but he's a detective. He was a sheriff in Wyoming and solves mysteries in his county. Definitely more of a mystery vibe, I would say, than this one. Murder mystery vibe, usually, for this one, but it's good.
Nice. Yeah. So I said The Cuckoo's Calling, and this is the first book in the Cormoran Strike series written by Robert Galbraith, who's actually J.K. Rowling. She writes it under that pseudonym. And the reason I said this is not because that the crimes are similar and the way that the murder mysteries are set up are similar, but the way that both French and J.K. Rowling include everyday things that make the book even more realistic. I just love that they talk about Cal peeling potatoes and eating ham sandwiches and having a glass of milk for Trey. I think those are mundane things that books overlook, but that's, to me, what makes great writing. And J.K. Rowling does the same thing. She really opens up the city of London with all of her descriptions of where Cormoran gets takeout or the roads he's driving on. Just getting all of that extra detail that does drag out a book, but also I think makes a book exceptional to me. And so that's why I recommend those two. And plus, because
I think
we'd be remiss to not recommend that series at some point. I know we've already said it, but in a formal way. So
I think that's a good reason for recommending. I take back my
so I had a reason, but what was your
I just thought you recommended it was a mystery written in England, and I was just like, this is such a different book, such a different. I recommend that book to everybody, which is why I guess I didn't have a huge problem with it because it's such a good book, but I just thought not similar at all. Yeah. I currently am reading perhaps my favorite historical fiction ever, if not my favorite book. Wow. I am absolutely in love with this. It's Only Time Will Tell by Jeffrey Archer. Okay. So many good characters. It's written about in the interwar period in Britain, which is not my cup of tea.
Between World War I and World War II.
Yeah. So good. Would highly recommend. Gives very Hearts Invisible Furies mixed with the Century Trilogy vibes. Just phenomenal.
Wait, Century Trilogy for life.
Dude, it's so good. Until you guys read that, I read so little historical fiction that, I just really...
Sweet. I'm going to read that. It sounds like a winner for sure. Isaac, what are you currently reading?
Yeah, so I know we talked about me reading a love story. I'm not reading that. I just blew through Bloodslong, and now I'm working on Tower Lord, book 1 and 2 of the Raven Shadow series, which are, if you like the Game of Thrones, you would love them. They're awesome.
Oh, sweet.
Yeah.
I have to read those. I love Game of Thrones. And I don't think I've read that. I haven't heard of those. I am reading the Dublin Murder Squad books, also by Tana French. They also kind of have an element of not quite getting the justice that you're seeking either. So that's kind of a vibe that I think that French an angle that she likes to explore. But again, very good character development. Would recommend, I think. And then that brings us to a close, and just so we can let our readers and our club members know what's coming for 2 weeks from now, we are going to be reading Foster by Claire Keegan, and this was a Bo Stewart special. So basically this is a short story, and it's about a young girl living with distant relatives. It's also based in Ireland, and she is understanding about she is coming from a family with a lot of children and not a lot of time for her, and so these relatives have more time for her, and it's a story of their relationship. And it's very well written. Keegan is very famous for her prose, so it should be a very enjoyable read for us, hopefully. And again, Bo Stewart would not lead us astray, except for Doppelganger, which he hadn't read us in time. Well, okay, with learning about what we're reading next week, we can close, and we will be excited to talk about that with you guys next time. So until then, call a friend or a sibling or anybody that you want to talk to about a good book that you've recently read. Go to your local library or use your Libby app to pick up your next good book. And until next time, stay classy, second pagers. See you later.
See you guys.
Let's go beyond.